Hey everyone, and welcome to the Deep Dive. We take a deep dive into stacks of research and boil it down to the good stuff just for you. Today we are taking a deep dive into something that many people don't think twice about until they start feeling run down. Vitamin B12.
Hi, everyone. I'm a nutritionist and researcher, and I'm excited to break down why B12 is about so much more than just energy levels.
Right. We all know it's important, but I was blown away by just how many crucial processes it's involved in. Brain health, nerve function, even your DNA. And you know what's wild? A lot of people are walking around deficient and they don't even realize it.
That's absolutely true, and it's something we'll definitely dig into today.
Before we get too deep into it, I wanted to mention that this deep dive is brought to you by Detox Health. If you're into health and wellness, especially if you're looking for some tasty and healthy recipes, their YouTube channel is a gold mine.
They really do have some fantastic resources. I definitely recommend checking them out.
Okay, so back to B12. Like I said, most people connect it with energy, right? Feeling sluggish, maybe you need more B12. But in our research from Harvard Medical School and Medical News Today, we found out it's way more than just an energy booster.
Exactly. Think of B12 as a behind-the-scenes operator, ensuring your body's systems run smoothly.
So what are some of these behind-the-scenes roles that B12 plays?
Well, one of the most critical is its role in your nervous system. B12 is essential for the formation of myelin, the protective sheath that surrounds your nerve fibers. Think of myelin as the insulation around electrical wires.
Okay, I'm picturing it. And what does myelin actually do?
Myelin helps nerve impulses travel quickly and efficiently throughout your body. Without enough B12, that transmission can slow down, and you might experience things like brain fog, difficulty concentrating, or even numbness and tingling in your extremities.
So if you're feeling mentally sluggish or your hands are constantly falling asleep, low B12 could be a factor.
It's definitely a possibility, and that's just one example. B12 is also crucial for the creation of red blood cells, which carry oxygen throughout your body.
Right, and that's where anemia comes in, doesn't it?
Exactly. When you're deficient in B12, your body can develop a specific type of anemia called megaloblastic anemia. Imagine your red blood cells are like tiny ships carrying vital supplies of oxygen to every cell in your body.
Okay, I like where this analogy is going.
With megaloblastic anemia, these ships are being built too big and clunky. They're inefficient at carrying oxygen, and your body starts to experience the effects. You might feel fatigued, short of breath, or even have heart palpitations because your cells aren't getting the oxygen they need.
Wow, that paints a very clear picture of how important B12 is for our overall health.
And we haven't even touched on its role in DNA synthesis and cell division. B12 is literally involved in building and maintaining the blueprint of life itself.
It's incredible how such a tiny vitamin can have such a huge impact. Speaking of impact, a statistic from Medical News Today really jumped out at us. Up to 20% of people over 60 are deficient in B12.
That's a significant number, and it highlights the importance of being aware of B12 levels, especially as we age. Unfortunately, many people are deficient and don't even know it.
But why isn't B12 deficiency caught sooner? You'd think doctors would routinely check for it, given how vital it is.
You'd think so, right? There are a few potential reasons for this. First, the symptoms of B12 deficiency can be subtle and easily mistaken for other conditions, especially in the early stages.
So fatigue, brain fog, and those tingling sensations we talked about earlier, they can fly under the radar.
Exactly. And second, while B12 testing is available, it's not always included in routine blood work.
That's concerning, considering how widespread deficiency seems to be.
Okay, let's say someone is deficient. What are the most common signs they should look out for? We touched on a few already, but let's dive a little deeper. Well, fatigue is often the first sign people notice. But it's not just feeling tired, it's a persistent lack of energy that doesn't improve with rest.
So if you're constantly hitting the snooze button and struggling to get through the day, it might be worth considering your B12 levels.
Absolutely. And as we mentioned earlier, neurological symptoms like numbness and tingling in the hands and feet are also common.
Those tingling sensations can be pretty alarming. What causes them?
It all comes back to myelin, that protective sheath around your nerve fibers. When B12 levels or low myelin production can be disrupted, leading to nerve damage and those uncomfortable sensations.
That makes sense. Are there any other neurological symptoms we should be aware of?
Yes, some people experience difficulty walking or maintaining their balance in more severe cases. B12 deficiency can even lead to vision problems, memory loss, and mood changes.
It's incredible how far-reaching the effects of B12 deficiency can be. It really highlights how crucial this vitamin is for our overall well-being.
Exactly, and it's why early detection is so important.
Okay, so let's talk about how to make sure we're getting enough B12. Where do we find it?
Well, the primary source of B12 is animal products like meat, poultry, fish eggs, and dairy.
So if you're a meat eater, you're probably in good shape, right?
Most likely, yes, but
Huh.
it's still a good idea to be mindful of your intake, especially if you're experiencing any of the deficiency symptoms we discussed.
What about for vegetarians and vegans? Where can they get B12 if animal products are off the table?
That's a great question, and it's something that anyone following a plant-based diet needs to be very conscious of. While B12 isn't naturally found in plant-based foods, there are a few good options.
Okay, give us the rundown.
First, some foods are fortified with B12. This means that B12 has been added during processing. You'll find fortified B12 in some plant-based milks like almond milk or soy milk, as well as in certain breakfast cereals.
So check those labels carefully.
Absolutely. Always read the nutrition label to see if a product is fortified with B12. And then there's nutritional yeast, which is a popular ingredient in vegan cooking. Some varieties of nutritional yeast are fortified with B12, so that's another good option.
And of course, there are always supplements, right?
Right. And for many vegans and vegetarians, a B12 supplement is the most reliable way to ensure they're meeting their daily needs.
So we've got fortified foods and supplements. Any other ways for vegans and vegetarians to get B12 naturally?
Unfortunately, not really. There's a common misconception that certain plant-based foods like spirulina or tempeh contain B12, but the B12 in these foods is actually an inactive form called B12 analogs.
Analogs, what are those?
B12 analogs have a similar structure to active B12, but they don't function the same way in the body. In fact, they can actually interfere with the absorption of true B12.
So even if you're eating a lot of spirulina, you could still be deficient in active B12.
Exactly. That's why it's so important for vegans and vegetarians to be proactive about getting B12 from reliable sources like fortified foods and supplements.
This is super helpful information. I think a lot of people, including myself, had some misconceptions about where B12 comes from and how it's absorbed.
It's definitely a topic that's often misunderstood, but the good news is once you understand the basics, it's easy to make sure you're getting enough of this essential vitamin.
Okay, so let's talk about those basics. How is B12 actually absorbed by the body? I remember you mentioned something about intrinsic factor earlier.
Yes, intrinsic factor is a key player in B12 absorption. It's a protein produced by cells in your stomach, and it's essential for escorting B12 from your stomach into your small intestine, where it can be absorbed into your bloodstream.
So without enough intrinsic factor, you can't absorb B12 effectively.
Exactly. And this is why people with certain digestive conditions like pernicious anemia, which affects intrinsic factor production, often require B12 injections to bypass the absorption process in the gut.
That makes sense. Now, what about the B12 in fortified foods or supplements? Is it absorbed differently than the B12 found in animal products?
Good question. The B12 in supplements and fortified foods is typically in a free form, meaning it doesn't need to be released from protein like the B12 found in animal products. This means it's generally easier for the body to absorb.
So it's essentially a more direct route to getting B12 into your system.
Exactly, but remember, even free-form B12 still requires intrinsic factor for proper absorption.
Got it. So we've established that B12 is crucial, but certain groups are at higher risk of deficiency, right?
Definitely. We touched on older adults earlier, and it's worth emphasizing why they're particularly vulnerable as we age. Our stomach produces less hydrochloric acid, which is needed to release B12 from protein in food.
So even if older adults are eating plenty of B12-rich foods, they might not be absorbing it efficiently.
Exactly, and this is where a B12 supplement can be incredibly beneficial.
What about other high-risk groups? We've already talked about vegans and vegetarians. Anyone else we should be aware of?
Yes, people with certain health conditions that affect nutrient absorption, like celiac disease or Crohn's disease, are also at increased risk of B12 deficiency.
And what about people who take medications that affect stomach acid production?
Absolutely. Some medications like antacids or proton pump inhibitors can reduce stomach acid levels, which can impair B12 absorption.
It seems like there are a lot of potential roadblocks to getting enough B12. So what can people do to make sure they're covering their bases?
Well, the first step is to be aware of your individual risk factors.
So consider your age, diet, any health conditions you might have, and any medications you're taking.
Exactly. If you fall into any of the higher risk categories, it's worth talking to your doctor about getting your B12 levels checked.
And even if you don't think you're at risk, paying attention to your diet and including plenty of B12-rich foods is always a good idea.
Absolutely. And if you're vegan or vegetarian, remember those fortified foods and supplements.
Okay, let's say someone is deficient in B12. What happens next?
Well, the treatment for B12 deficiency depends on the severity and the underlying cause. In most cases, a B12 supplement will be recommended.
Are all B12 supplements created equal?
That's a great question. There are a few different forms of B12 supplements available, and they have slightly different properties.
So there are different kinds of B12 supplements. Fill me in, because this is news to me.
The two most common forms are cyanocobalamin and methylcobalamin.
Okay, break those down for me. What's the difference and which one should people choose?
Cyanocobalamin is a synthetic form of B12. It's the type you'll most commonly find in supplements because it's readily available and affordable. Your body converts cyanocobalamin into the active forms of B12 that it needs.
So it's like a provitamin, kind of? The body uses it to make what it really needs.
That's a good way to think about it. Now, methylcobalamin is a naturally occurring form of B12. It's already in an active form, so it doesn't need to be converted.
It's like ready to go, right out of the gate.
Precisely. Some people find that they absorb and utilize methylcobalamin better, but it's generally more expensive than cyanocobalamin.
So it really comes down to personal preference and what your doctor recommends.
Exactly. It's always best to talk to your healthcare provider to determine the best form and dosage for you.
Great advice. Now, before we wrap up, I wanted to circle back to something you mentioned earlier, the connection between B12 and gut health. Seems like everyone's talking about gut health these days. What's the link?
It's a fascinating connection. As we discussed, B12 is absorbed in the small intestine with the help of intrinsic factor. But here's the thing. The health of your gut microbiome, that vast community of microorganisms living in your digestive tract, can actually influence how well you absorb B12.
Hold on. Walk me through this. How can these tiny organisms affect something as important as B12 absorption?
It all comes down to balance. Certain types of bacteria in your gut can actually compete with your body for B12. If you have an overgrowth of these bacteria, it can reduce the amount of B12 you're able to absorb.
So even if I'm taking a B12 supplement or eating B12-rich foods, I might not be getting the full benefit if my gut is out of whack.
That's exactly right. It highlights the importance of a holistic approach to health. It's not just about getting enough B12, it's about creating an environment in your gut that allows for optimal absorption.
So how do we create that optimal gut environment? What can people do to support their gut health?
Well, a diet rich in fiber is crucial. Fiber acts as food for the beneficial bacteria in our gut, helping them to flourish.
So load up on those fruits, veggies, and whole grains.
Exactly. Probiotics can also be helpful. You can find them in fermented foods like yogurt, sauerkraut, kimchi, and even in supplement form, probiotics introduce beneficial bacteria into your gut, helping to restore balance and improve overall gut health.
It sounds like taking care of our gut health is just as important as ensuring adequate B12 intake.
Absolutely. It's all interconnected. A healthy gut contributes to better nutrient absorption, which in turn supports overall health and well-being.
This has been such an eye-opening deep dive into the world of B12. I think we all learned a lot today. Any final thoughts you want to leave our listeners with?
I think the key takeaway is that B12 is a vital nutrient that plays a role in so many aspects of our health. Don't underestimate its importance. If you're experiencing any of the symptoms we discussed, talk to your doctor about getting your B12 levels checked. And remember, a healthy gut contributes to better B12 absorption, so prioritize those gut-friendly foods.
Great advice. And for more amazing tips on how to support your health and well-being, be sure to check out Detox Health's YouTube channel. They have a wealth of information on everything from nutrition to healthy recipes. Don't forget to subscribe.
They really do. I highly recommend subscribing to their channel.
Well, folks, that's a wrap on our B12 Deep Dive. Thanks for joining us. We hope you learned something new and feel empowered to take control of your health. We'll see you next time on the Deep Dive.